Hello world, my name is Amelia and welcome back to another one of my videos, and in this video, it's story time. I figured that, you know, being transgender, it's very interesting to actually work on trying to come up with particularly stories about being trans, because, you know, some people love to hear these things. So I just had in the past week something very interesting happen to me that I never once expected to come. So before I get into that, however, say hello to my new setup so far. This is my office, which I have been working on. We're still not completely finished yet, but at least now I'm in here and actually recording a position. So anyways, the story is actually pretty simple. It's all about dating. So something that I have actually been ever since I'm single now. I'm going through a divorce and fun stuff like that. But what's very important is that I have been actually looking to find someone new in my life for a while now, just because I'm the kind of person that just doesn't do very well on her own. So I so far haven't really had too much experience dating. Last year I was very adamant when I first got out of my marriage to date, because I still had a very strong connection towards, you know, not I kind of felt like it was a dishonor to the vows I made when I married my previous spouse, for me to go out and date and to actually find somebody else. So even though this person that I was married to, we were no longer wished to be together, and obviously they married a completely different person than who I am today, it was definitely turned into one of those things where I still in my heart felt like it was wrong of me to go off and date without our marriage completely being dissolved. So I actually didn't date very much last year. It took me a while to actually get back into the dating scene. I remember the very first time I created a dating profile online on, I believe it was Tinder, and I just was kind of sitting there swiping, and I was swiping through these photos of these guys, and it was kind of weird, because obviously this was the very first time that I was exploring my attraction to men. And I'm sitting there just swiping from photo to photo, and I'm like, oh, he's hot. Oh, he's not so hot. He's hot. And I got to that point of all of a sudden realizing, I was like, oh wow, like this has actually been something different. And I would definitely love to maybe talk more about that in another video, about how my attractions have changed and my experiences such as that. However, for this particular incident, case, just know that yes, I was kind of swiping through these photos and I kind of got to rediscover myself. But I felt so ridiculously guilty for doing that. I felt a huge burden on my heart, just being like, I feel like I am violating the vows I made to my ex. Even though we were not there for each other anymore, I still felt like there was some sort of vows made, and it was wrong of me to violate them. I never went out on any dates. I only maybe talked to a couple guys, you know, kind of had some pokes here and there. I believe it was towards the end of the year, there was one particular guy I talked to, but I even told him I wasn't really interested in dating just yet, and he kind of disappeared into the woodwork. Well then, beginning of this year, this beginning of this year, I was informed that my ex had started dating as well. I was told that they were actually in a relationship with somebody, and I just felt like it was that, as much as I kind of felt a little upset by hearing it, because again, it was that kind of thing on me that sat there and said, what about those vows that we made? And I don't believe that we should be breaking those vows until in a court of law, and et cetera, et cetera. I can be very traditionalist when it comes to those kind of things, traditionalism, and being like, I mean, during my wedding to my ex, I felt very, I felt very much like taking communion and doing a couple other sacred things in a marriage were very important to us. And I would probably still uphold those later in a second marriage. However, it was still one of those things where I feel very much like the marriage vows are very important to me. And here is my ex basically saying they meant shit. So that was basically the moment that I realized, okay, that's them basically giving me permission to go off and date. I didn't really go out on any dates. By this time, I just cranked up the amount of times that I was talking to people because I was honestly very lonely by this point. I messaged a lot of guys. There was one guy that really took off. I ended up, and this is where I really want to go into the subject about, as a trans woman, when is it appropriate to tell a guy, or in this case, if you were a transbian, as I've heard it said, that you are into women, when is it appropriate to tell them you're trans? Which I would definitely agree, somebody who's a trans lesbian probably doesn't have to deal with that as much as somebody who's into men. Anyways, the point is, if you're dating men, when is it appropriate to tell them? I have heard a whole mix of opinions. I've heard everything from, well, you should tell them, you should put it up front and right there on the front of your profile and say right there, oh, I'm a trans woman, da 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 da. And then I've also heard the opinion that it's none of their business. Obviously, I feel the answer is probably somewhere in between there. My reason I don't like saying, even though I did on all of my dating profiles, did say very much up front that I was trans, because I am at the point in my transition that I do pass on some pretty good occasions, which is very much interesting. You can literally pull up some of my photos on my dating profiles and you really don't know that I'm trans. I mean, there would probably be very little way of knowing. So I don't like publishing right on the front page that I am trans, because virtually every single time that I have that occur where I'm very upfront about it, the number one kind of guy that I find that I attract is the chasers, the trans chasers. Because any guy who's looking for a genuine relationship to have children with a woman tends to just be like, oh, they're trans. And that's not even necessarily because they're against dating a trans woman. It's just that a lot of times I think that we as the trans community can set a really bad image of what a trans woman is. And a lot of straight guys can just be like, I don't even want to mess with it. They might even be curious. They might even be okay with it, but they don't even want to try in the first place just because of their perception of what a trans woman is. But because I had at least maybe 2 or 3 guys who reached out to me, started talking to me, and then I kind of was trying to figure out a way to filter them out, and I would sit there and be like, so what is your orientation? And then their response is, oh, I'm straight. Oh yeah, I'm straight. I'm into women. Oh yeah, I'm a cis man. And then you start actually talking to them, and then you come to find out that, well, that's only a white lie. They wouldn't date a non-trans woman or a cis woman. They only date trans women, because one of them in particular literally then asked me if I was post-op or not. And the way they asked me very much came off as they were only interested in you-know-what. But I digress. So I went on and kind of had some of these conversations with some guys. I mean, some of them turned into some very genuine conversations. I did have one particular guy, the guy that I ended up talking to the year before, he finally all of a sudden came out of the woodwork and started talking to me again. We actually went out on a date. We had a really good time. He obviously accepted me. He was very much, I came to find out, which was very fascinating, he ended up telling me that one of the main reasons he was okay with being in a relationship with a trans woman was because he himself was infertile. He was incapable of having children. So being in a relationship with me, he had no problems with the fact that he was never going to be able to have biological children because he already knew that he couldn't have biological children. And I think that's extremely important for trans people, is especially if you're dating someone who is cis, who's the opposite sex. It's very important to understand that I think it's very common for them to have a problem with knowing that it's the same as a relationship. Like, one of my friends, she's infertile, and she's always had that problem too, talking to guys, having these relationships with guys, and then as soon as she tells them that she can't have children, she might get dumped, or it might turn into a problem. And I believe that it's obviously a problem that cis women that are infertile have, but it's definitely something that we trans women also have, is that these people got to accept that we can't have children. And I think that's the number one problem. So anyways, I did build a relationship with this guy. We went out on several dates. He brought me roses. It was really cute and really adorable. I had an amazing time. I felt very legitimately validated. It just all the more made me realize how genuine and authentic I felt. However, once COVID hit, he all of a sudden went MIA on me. I can't say why. I still don't know why. But I digress. I don't want to talk about necessarily what's going on in that situation. Let's just say that he was my boyfriend, and then he kind of disappeared. I do kind of hope that he might pop up again really soon, or I don't know. I'm kind of a little upset at him for disappearing and not responding to my messages, or ghosting me. I don't know what's going on. So anyways, I want to just stop talking about it there. So then that just takes me to this most recent experience I had happen. I started up on a new dating app, and I went on the dating app, and one of the things, I don't know if anyone's heard of this one, it's called Hinge. It was very targeted towards me on Facebook. And one of the things that I realized about Hinge when I set up a profile on there is they actually make it very difficult to, there's no like about me or bio you write on there. Everything is just like stats. You fill in like, what is your gender? What is your age? Well, the only place that I could possibly see that you can make it clear that you are transgender is hitting a drop down that says, what is your gender? And then, because obviously the options is male, female, and custom. Well, if you hit the custom, you can go under there and there's an option for trans woman. But again, going back into, I think I have said it in a previous video, I do not like identifying as a trans woman. I always, under gender, I just select woman. I am a woman. And then it's usually in the description or the bio that I might clear that up. But then on top of that, the Hinge app automatically hides your gender. There is an option you have to click to say make my gender visible. But by default, when you first sign up for the app, your gender is hidden. You have to go under settings to make it visible. So I just was like, you know what? Whatever. Let me just try using this app as is. I did make my gender visible, but I did just leave it as woman. And very quickly, my inbox was filled with matches, and I did the same thing I would do with Tinder or Facebook dating. I was like, okay, he's cute. I had a few of them message me, kind of, the typical things. Well, then I had this one particular guy start messaging me, and like the very first conversation we had was about politics, which, hint out there for any guys coming from a woman, politics are not a way to win a girl over. Because even when I sat there and asked him, like, why was the politics so important to you? He's like, oh, I just want to make sure we're on the same page. And I'm like, that's not how you do that. Okay. But anyways, it was on politics, and the sad thing is he was a Trump supporter. Not to say that there's anything wrong with that. It's just that when it comes down to it, when you really start investigating their values, everything is extremely gun-toting conservative. So I was just kind of like, well, it's not that, because like I do have some conservative beliefs, obviously. Like I think when it came to social beliefs, our political social angles, there was some differences there, but I was just like, whatever, I'll go out with the guy, let me give it a shot. So one evening we finally decided, well, we're gonna go meet at Buffalo Wild Wings, and we sat down. And I was actually really afraid, because he was just like, well, just cut. It was like a last minute thing. I was at work. I didn't have a chance to really put any makeup on. Honestly, I kind of feel like I was even in rougher condition than I am here now on camera. And as a lot of you know, I kind of do very rough videos. I don't really get super overdressed for them usually. And we sat down, and I walked in that moment I was just like, this guy is gonna know that I'm trans. I feel very insecure about myself. Surprisingly, I walk in there, here I am wearing shorts and a t-shirt, looking not much different than I do now. And from the moment he saw me, he was just like, he even sat there like before I got there and sent me a message about, oh, I'm going on a date tonight with a very beautiful girl. And I was like, okay. So I knew in my heart that I wanted to tell him I was trans. And I was kind of like, well, let me just see how the date goes. And I kind of was just kind of sitting there, just mind my own business. I was planning on telling him. And then as the date progressed, all of a sudden the big question came up. He looks at me and he's like, what do you think about LGBT issues? Obviously, he asked me about a billion other things going on in the world, but he particularly asked about LGBT. Now, some may think that he was trying to bait me in the fact of asking because he might have been curious. Which, I mean, there might have been a slight grain, but he definitely didn't act like he knew or suspected anything. He starts talking to me, and then I just gave my honest opinion about how I thought about homosexual people, about transgender people, and things like that. And then he just kind of, okay, yeah, I can understand that. But he's like, but I would never let my child be trans, which... let's just say he was a spitting image of what my parents believe. If things continued on, things were fine. And then all of a sudden it got down to it, and it was like, finally, I think he made a comment about, oh, I think all people who are homosexual are sinners, and they are, wrong. And then I just said, okay, to just be clear, you're just talking about homosexual people, right? And then he stops for a minute and he goes, no, I'm talking about trans people too. I think they're just as crazy, if not crazier. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh! So I just kind of played it cool, and I was like, okay. And I just kind of, and that whole time he even he's making comments and remarks about how he's like, oh, you're a woman and stuff like that. And he's like, you just couldn't understand. And I'm sitting there kind of nodding and smiling. I'm like, yeah, I couldn't understand. Yeah, because it's not like I'm actually trans or anything. I had one of my friends later even sit there and tell me, she's like, man, if I went out and got in the car, she's like, I would immediately pulled out my phone and texted him and been like, so guess what? So anyways, that was pretty much the date. I pretty much decided after he made the comments that I was crazy. We went our separate ways, and I was just like, well, you know what? He doesn't need to know. I'm just gonna let him believe that I was a cis woman, if that's what he wants to believe, and I think that would be for the best. Because honestly, if it really came down to it, and I had told him I was trans, and especially if he responded poorly, he would then probably develop some very poor opinions of trans women. Because I did get the opportunity to speak my opinions and being very positive about the trans community and how I don't believe that we are a bunch of crazy, messed up people. However, I think it was just for the best that he didn't know otherwise, and because he would probably come up with opinions of oh, she tricked me, she just wanted to get in my pants, blah blah blah. And actually, he probably wouldn't even say he'd probably be like, he wanted to get into my pants. He was just as messed up as the rest of them for not telling me. So anyways, I'm going to leave that there, so don't forget to like and subscribe. And I will see you all later. Bye!